So, Don, welcome to part two of Heaviest Hitters. I really enjoyed the last one we did. And now we're going to bring it up to the modern day. I think we left it around George Foreman. He blasted on the scene through Fraser, through Ollie. Ollie hovered around at that time, but he's never was the biggest of hitters. And there's two types of hitters. There's the ones that more or less, it's going to finish in the concussive end, or you're going to go for the smooth boxer that usually knocks them out. After Foreman, where would you go in regards to big hitters?
Well, I think after Foreman had a spate of terrific punchers who were not necessarily heavyweight champs, but terrific in their division. Ernie Shavers is always remembered as one of the hardest knockout punchers of all time. And well respected by
all the other heavyweights as well for his punch power.
Oh, absolutely. I remember the night he knocked down Larry Holmes in a heavyweight title fight. Larry got up to stop him, but boy, that guy was lethal. And I was sitting in the front row when he knocked out Ken Norton. And when the bell rang, I'm not anybody who's a great predictor, but you could see the literal fear in Norton's eyes. And I said to Bill Daly, a great old manager sitting next to me, I said, this is going one round. And he turned to me and said, how audacious. But you just saw it. He just came out and demolished him. And yet, as good a puncher as he was, Ron Lyle knocked him out. And that was another formidable knockout.
Yeah, of course.
And a kid named Mac Foster, who was 24-0 with 24 knockouts on his way up and having knocked out guys like, Zora Foley in one round. So these are three formidable guys. And ironically, a guy who you don't perceive as a great puncher, but a pretty good fighter, Jerry Quarry, knocked two of those guys out and defeated Lyle by decision. So it just shows you being a great knockout puncher sometimes really doesn't get you the best prize, but they were terrific, terrific punches. And I think memorable for everybody who saw them or heard about it.
And why did certain fighters have that reputation and certain fighters didn't? You can go to the average man in the street and be able to pick certain fighters like your Mike Tyson and people like that. But then when you talk about Ernie Shavers and Quarries and people like that, they don't know what was the difference that made some fighters bigger knockout artists than others.
Well, I think it's a lot to do with the opposition, although those three we mentioned beat pretty good guys, particularly Shavers. He was the one, I go into the line that the second best fighter of his time, where he was good enough to get there, but he wasn't good enough to beat a Muhammad Ali, for example. And he wasn't good enough just to go over that next level to beat Quarry. But I think a lot of knockout today, as you know, John, so many records are manufactured. You see a guy running knockouts, you start matching him up, particularly with weak opposition, so he can continue that streak. It builds up box office. There's a particular example, a kid named Edgar Berlanga today, who ran off a string of one-round knockouts instead of just knockouts, one-round knockouts. And finally, somebody took him the distance, and his last fight, he went the distance again. So once you burst that bubble, if they're not legitimately earned knockouts, it sort of changes the picture. You've got to be a fighter with multiple dimensions to be good. And there are fighters who, again, don't have these 80 and 95% knockout ratios, but they're great punchers. There's no question about it.
That mindset, was that not the early fear with Mike Tyson when he first blasted on the scene and he was turning him over? So eventually he'd have to come up against that test, but still managed to keep hold of that knockout reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mike Tyson, again, he was not only a knockout puncher, but a great fighter. So he backed it up. I guess the fight that we most remember that made him, so to speak, before he was champ, was knocking out Marvis Frazier in one round. I mean, Frazier, he'd been stopped by Larry Holmes, but still he had won all his fights with the exception of that one. And he just blew him out. His name Frazier was so well known that it gave Mike a reputation. And then he came in and won the world heavyweight title by stopping Trevor Berbick and unified it with a one-round knockout of Michael Spinks, which is really, really rare. I mean, he, in essence, he won the lineal title. And I think he and Sonny Liston are the only two heavyweights to win a world title by one-round knockout. And Liston, we spoke of earlier.
Yeah, of course, Michael Spinks, he was former light heavyweight. He decided to step up to heavyweight, and he was well respected throughout. But how Tyson demolished him it was ridiculous. And then, of course, Trevor Berbick, how many times was he down? From one shot, so 6,
like
7
a basketball going down. Yeah. And we don't forget, Larry Holmes, he was never stopped before or since. And after the loss to Tyson, he came back to have 25 fights. So it's not that was the very end of his career. He did pretty well, and Tyson demolished him. So he was not a great puncher only, but a great fighter.
So someone just had that dynamite punch I'd probably go to somebody, I mentioned him last time, who I thought was an underrated puncher, as in Prince Nassim Hamid. The power he could generate, and if he didn't knock you out, he hurt you. You could see people just fall to pieces when they were touched correctly by that shot. The power was in the legs or in the timing as well, and everything was there. And that's a kind of punch perfect that the fans get excited and giddy about. I expect when you get in a fight, they don't expect you to go the distance. They expect the fight to finish early.
No, absolutely. I remember the famous fight he had in the Garden with Kevin Kelly, and this was another, like we talked about the fight with Berber going down, but both of them were down, I think, 3 times apiece. It was a real brawl, and Kelly was not a bad knockout puncher himself. But yeah, Naz Hamid, again, because he wasn't all one-dimensional, just knockout, but he boxed as well. And again, another great fighter. He doesn't get the reputation that some guy he just scored a slew of only knockouts, like a Zarate or Oliveras. But this guy was a great puncher, no question about it. Yes.
So Don, talk about Prince Nassim Hamid. What about Kenny McKinney? That guy could punch. What a right hand he had.
Yeah, no, phenomenal puncher. Knocked out Junior Jones. Again, he's one of these guys, a great fighter, a great puncher who's sort of overlooked because he didn't, retain the title for a long time, and he sort of blew out quickly. But that happens with great knockout puncher. Great, shots to the head. Great right hand puncher. And you talk about Hamed, then you got to speak about Barrera, who basically ended his career, one of the great fighters of all time from Mexico. They're perfect punches, the left hook to the liver, this body punching where he could take you apart just hitting your shots below the belt. Sam Langford famously said, you kill the body, the head will die. And I don't think any group of fighters were better than the Mexicans, who just taught that as something very specific to go to, the left hook to the liver.
So let's just leave that for now, because I think that's another series down the line, the body punches, because I'm quite sure we can have a lot of fun with that.
Terrific. So
let's talk about the era when you're talking about the Garbies, Julian Jackson, Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran. How would you sum up those fights, those knockout artists as well?
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. And you can throw Hagler in there, who could hit you on the chin.
Of course, yeah.
Remember what he did to Tommy Hearns, those 2 lightning bolt shots, and Tommy sailing across the ring and Hagler following him and just knocking him dead. But it was a great era. Again, one would knock out the other. You had Hearns knocking Duran dead, and after that, Hagler knocking out Hearns and just destroying him. So this was a really formidable time. Nigel Benn probably doesn't get credit as a great knockout puncher, but he was formidable. He won that McClellan fight, which was one of the great battles of all time.
Of course, again, and the thing is, I suppose somebody like Thomas Hearns was more revered for his knockout power than actually his boxing ability, because when he boxed Sugar Ray Leonard, an unbelievable boxer, he was actually beating him on points, outboxing him, and nobody could believe it.
No, and if you look at the rematch where he dropped Leonard, again, it went to called a draw, but most everybody was at that fight or saw it on television or seen it since, felt that Hearns should have won that bout, and he got a bad decision in that. But yeah, he was multidimensional. But again, a great puncher, one of the great, probably top 10 greatest punchers of all time in any weight class.
You mentioned Nigel Benn. Was he respected over there stateside as well, as a puncher, as a big name, as a force to be reckoned with?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't think he got the reputation, obviously, in the United States that he did in Britain, because he hadn't fought here that often. But having seen him fight, he was a force to behold when he was at his peak. I mean, I remember the fights with Eubank, where Eubank managed to nullify some of that punching power. But when he was coming up, and when he won the title in Italy, and you're just banging guys out right and left, I mean, he was something really exceptional.
Just certain fighters that were probably maneuvered away from Nigel because they were probably all wrong, from likes of Julian Jackson, the likes of James Toney, the likes of I know he boxed McLaren, but there were certain fighters that it was just too. Nigel was a risk taker, so you'd either give or get given. So there's certain people you couldn't risk putting them in with, such as your Julian Jacksons, who could knock somebody out and walk away, before they've even landed.
Yes, and at the end of their careers, you still had Hagler and Hearns, but they never ventured to go into the ring with Nigel Benn either, although they would have been big money matches. I think they would stay on this side of the pond and then pick our opposition. But he was a great attraction as well, and knockout punches generally are. Another fight that never took place was Julian Jackson Mugabe. I would have loved to have seen
Oh, of
that.
course. That would have been mad. Yeah.
War. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you think of any fights that managed to take that punch power up through the weights and still have the knockout success? Moving up from middleweight to, I don't know, super middle, light, heavy, cruiser, and heavy. Can you think of any fighters that managed to do that? Obviously, Evander Holyfield managed to do it from cruiserweight to heavyweight, but it took a bit of time at first, didn't it? That introduction to heavyweights.
It did, because well, that's now they have a bridgerweight division starting at 200 to 225. But when he moved up again, you had to really adjust, because you were going from 200 pounds now to unlimited weight, giving away not 10 or 15% of body weight, but maybe 20% or 30% in classes, and that's a big difference. If you recall a fight, another guy was a formidable puncher, but I mean, for his size, maybe not, Nikolai Valuev, the big 7 foot.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And Holyfield fought him, and you can imagine I'm hitting him with my biggest shots. Not that Valuev was a better fighter, although he did win the fight because Evander was past his prime. But you have to say, boy, I'm hitting a guy now, not 10 or 15 pounds difference, but 70 pounds difference in weight. So it's very tough to adjust, although great fighters can do it, but he did. Tommy Hearns, he won the welterweight title by knocking out another great puncher, Pepino Cuevas. And then he won the vacant middleweight title by knocking out Roldan, who had dropped Hagler, if you recall, one of the few guys ever to do it. And then he won the light heavyweight title by stopping Dennis Andres. So he was good enough,
of course,
through 3 weight classes to continue his punching power. Alexis Arguello was another, won the featherweight title, I should say, by knocking out Ruben Oliveras. And then he moved up and won the junior lightweight title. He stopped Alfredo Escalera. He went the limit with Jim Watt as lightweight, but he managed to score a few knockouts there. So he carried his power up. And of course, we know that Sugar Ray Robinson was able to do that from welterweight into middleweight. He sort of ran aground at light heavy, just too much for him to cope with.
I've actually just remembered. I know we're jumping back and forth in time. The Radar. I wonder if you remember his real name, Wilfred Benitez.
Oh yes.
Oh my God! But he was a young talent, an amazing young talent.
Yes, he was a wonderful, great boxer. Brought up Wilfred, and in terms of Puerto Rico, Wilfredo Gomez is another one that we didn't mention. Bazooka Gomez, string of knockouts. He was the super bantamweight champion of the world. Moved up to featherweight. He sort of lost a lot of that power, as you say, John. It's very rare to move up and take that power with you, because you're conceding more weight to guys who are natural in that class. So you went up and fought a big heavyweight as well as you could punch at cruiserweight. You would have to sacrifice a bit, unless you won a title when you were young and hadn't matured into your full potential. So when these guys 18, 19, 20 win a title, maybe by the time they're 25, moved up to another division, they're really in effect stronger.
Would you say Triple G could be one of those fighters that could probably jump a couple of weights and 2 or 3 up and still carry that power?
Yeah, I believe that he could. He's been a little bit reluctant to do that, I guess because he's been making enough money at the middleweight division. They're talking about the 3rd Canelo fight, and I would have to imagine that it could not be made at anything less than 168 pounds. So, it's been a long time between fights, but he was another guy, one punch knockout power that he had. And that's really the mark of a great puncher, knock out one round, knock out in the last round. He has tremendous punching power. He's fighting this weekend. I'm sure he'll score a knockout over Murata, who is number 1, but I don't think he's in the class of Golovkin. And
a fight you just mentioned, as in Canelo. Canelo not just can knock people out, but he boxes. His talent, his skill is amazing.
Oh yeah, he's a well-rounded fighter. I when they go to the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, his name is always mentioned. And they got 2 other great formidable punchers today. Anui, this great Japanese bantamweight, who's moved up 3 times, and he's won by knockout every time he has, and probably will move up again. And then there's Arthur Beterbiev, a great light heavyweight champ, who's got a string. I think every victory he has is by knockout.
Are they not talking about him fighting Canelo down the line?
Right. I think he's fighting June 11th with Joe Smith here in Madison Square Garden. And after that, yes, I'll tell you, if he fought Canelo, I would have to pick Beterbiev. He doesn't have the skill level Canelo, but I think he's such a great puncher, just one shot. And again, Canelo's gotten by so far, John. He's won the 168. He moved up with Kovalev, picked his spot to win that title. But I think now he's really going to fight the absolute best boxer in that, the best puncher in that division. So, but
when I heard about him navigating his way through to cruiserweight, I was kind of insulted, if I'm honest with you. I thought, and if cruiserweight worth his salt, he's not going to let Canelo Alvarez come and manhandle him. But again, it's picking your spot. The right timing is everything. And I suppose when Mayweather got in with Canelo, it was amazingly successful at that point, Canelo. That was one of those fights where you thought, is Mayweather cashing out. He's going in there with this young guy that can punch, that can move, got an amazing fan base. And he probably just exposed the gulf in experience. But now Canelo's that fighter that can punch, that can box, but he's got to be smart about where he goes. Would be underestimating going in there against a light heavyweight puncher.
Oh yeah, look, he's got confidence, and it'll be a mega payday. I mean, if Beterbiev, and being Russian, of course, they're the villain of the month now, and it'll be like a Louis Schmeling kind of a fight setup. But he's fighting as the proxy for the Ukrainians, and Beterbiev, whether he wants it or not, it's going to be seen as that Russian villain who goes in the ring. And he's got all the earmark. If you look at him, he looks like one of these like Drago kind of opponents, tough, stone-faced, and Canelo has all the personality. So be a phenomenal match if they do. I must mention another guy who's moved up successfully in weight and still carry his knockout powers, Terence Crawford, the welterweight champion.
Of course. Terence Crawford.
Today's time.
Yeah, of course. Would you rate? I suppose you could jump up heavier now. Would you say Anthony Joshua was classed as a puncher? Would you say he's classed as a puncher more than a boxer?
Yeah, and I would say there's a case, John, where when we're talking about the great puncher, talk about Tyson, you talk about Dempsey, Lewis, Marciano, Foreman, they're the ones listed, and those are the ones who always come to mind. Yeah, Joshua, greatly underrated. I think 90% of his fights have been won by knockout. And, I saw him fight here at Spielka, I believe it was, and it was not Spielka. I mean, it's fights that he's had in Europe. I was thinking of Wilder for a second. I interchanged them. But Joshua, most of his fights, he's won by knockout. He's a powerful puncher, big, strong guy. And that's what made him such a great attraction. So I think he's another one that superficially we underrate as a great knockout puncher because he's big, he's got a good jab and everything else. But I think he's, a terrific knockout puncher.
And his day of reckoning when he took out Vladimir Klitschko, Vladimir Klitschko. Both Klitschko brothers were not just decent boxers, but they could bang. Who would you say was the biggest puncher out of the two of them?
Well, I always liked Vitaly. I think he was the better fighter. I think he was the better knockout puncher as well. He was, terrific. I mean, he was giving Lennox Lewis right on, was even ground with that. He got the bad cut. As you know, Lennox retired. They never fought a rematch. But I mean, he had been stopped once, Vitaly, but he could nail you. I mean, you had that run with, Mike Tyson and Vitaly Klitschko, and they were so dominant over guys. Again, they probably don't get credit because they were winning basically so easily that people didn't. I mean, a great fight that he had, if you may recall, was with the Nigerian Nightmare that he fought,
Oh, yes. God, what was his name? God, I can't remember his name. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Jeez, I forgot about that.
And, he was another great puncher as well. Heavyweights have a tendency because they're so big,
Yeah, Vitaly, I can remember we had a training camp set out in Gran Canaria, and he and half of the squad, the German squad, Darius Mikuchescu and all those boys, Oshiande, they all came out to the training camp, and we trained outside on like a little island set away from the hotel. And it was, we had our squad that were training there. Those guys, we trained at different times, but we all watch each other train. And I suppose the German squad or Eastern European squad sort of had an arrogance about them, as if to say we're better. We're the better squad here. We never managed to mix. Get a bit of a mix of sparring. It just wasn't done. I think the handler was very smart and very sharp in that, because a fight could have probably happened down the line. But it was a great time. But Vitaly, very serious guy. He was even now.
Look at him now, unbelievable.
Yeah. I think he actually wanted to get in the ring when AJ beat his brother. After that, he's thinking, I'm coming back. I want to fight again. Again, someone that was so underrated as a puncher.
Yes, he was, again, because he's so much bigger. They always figured he had every physical advantage. By the way, Sam Peter was the fighter we were referring to.
Samuel Peters. That's it. Samuel Peters.
Which brings up another Nigerian who went to jail, but he was a great puncher, Ike Ibiabuchi. I remember him, another powerful puncher. David Tua was another one, a guy from Samoa, fought Lennox Lewis. Yeah. Again, when he got in the ring with Lewis, Lewis just boxed. He stayed away, didn't take a chance, and won a 12-round decision. But again, these guys are great, great knockout punchers. But Vladimir Klitschko didn't get his just due because, again, he had such physical advantage in height and reach and size, overall size, is the width, his shoulders, everything else that they, when he knocked guys out, I guess they felt it was expected of him.
Tui, I remember, and Tui, I remember Tui at the time when he was just coming up onto the scene. I was boxing a guy out there called Jimmy Thunder. He also went on the name as Jimmy Pugh, and he was a big puncher. But it's the guys they fed him, which was why he was so successful. And Tua was sat ringside, so he was the next one coming through. And I think it was a fight they were trying to set up between them both. And then Thunder was exposed. I beat him, and I was a cruiserweight, but exposed to not be. He was manufactured. Whenever he boxed anybody could fight. That's when the trouble happened. Whereas Tua, he was like a little pocket rocket. He was just so strong, and that's why when boxed, you had to keep him long. Tua could be kept off, but I suppose it's like Mike Tyson fighting Lennox Lewis. Timing was everything. I suppose a younger Mike Tyson would have probably given Lennox Lewis more trouble because he was more athletic, more energetic. He was more dangerous. So timing was everything. Yeah.
Well, the question always comes to the four of them because they're basically contemporaries. Like you had in the 80s, you had Duran and you had Benitez and you had Leonard Hearns and Hagler. Here in that generation, we had Bo, we had Lennox Lewis, you had Mike Tyson towards the end, and Holyfield. And who's the best of the four? Well, if you just go on the results, Lewis beat Tyson and Holyfield beat Tyson. Bo never got a chance to fight them. But Bo fought Holyfield. But I still think Tyson was the greatest of the four overall. At his peak.
That's what I'm saying, 86 to probably 89, 90. I did agree with you. Mike Tyson was the one that you think, oh my gosh, this guy his star didn't shine that long in comparison, but that period of time, you just thought this guy's unbeatable. So he was avoided and maneuvered. Other people avoided and maneuvered themselves around him for that period, just until that star started to slip a little.
Yeah. And he came, he was a prodigy. He was very much like the fighter you mentioned, Radar Benitez earlier. He was the world champ at 17. He won his second world title at 19. He won his third world title at 24. He was finished, but he had won 3 championships. He had done what a fighter doesn't do in a career of, when he's 35 years of age. And Mike Tyson was there so early. And it just, I think the fame and everything, so many things get to them, natural ability, all that stuff. And I believe he would have knocked out Buster Douglas had he got the rematch right away. He didn't. Because
without a doubt. I think life took over it was prioritized everything over his boxing and everything. And you mentioned again Benitez, and it wasn't. I thought of a fighter that again wasn't rated for his punch power, but because he was so brilliant a boxer, Sugar Ray Leonard, who beat Benitez. Sugar Ray Leonard could punch, he could box. But his boxing overshadowed his punching because he was so flamboyant about it. He was so elegant with it.
Oh, 2 of the greatest performances I've ever seen by a boxer or by a fighter. Sugar Ray Leonard when he knocked out Dave Boy Green, and when he knocked out Andy Price in 1 round. Price had beaten Palomino and Cuevas. It was on an undercard to Holmes and Shavers. And Duran fought that night. And like in 66 seconds, he just demolished this contender who had been ducked by a lot of good fighters because he was excellent. And and the Dave Boy Green had come off a victory over John Stracey, I believe, was number 1 contender. And it was like a man and a boy. It was just unbelievable. This hand speed, the power, just the punches came, you couldn't count them. He's just remarkable fighter.
I've got to give some credit to some other British fighters. You may smile. Frank Bruno, big puncher, big dangerous guy. And that's what you went for. That's what you expected. You were very surprised actually if he boxed and it went the distance.
No, that's what they loved about him. 100%. Yes.
Yeah, he could knock a guy out with a jab, and I think Frank I could imagine him being a little frustrated because people, when they talk about him, they talk about his losses and not his wins, and that's the hardest thing. If you remember, he boxed Bonkrusher Smith.
Yeah.
Smith, he was doing so well, and Tim Witherspoon. Or was it Tim Witherspoon?
Yes,
Tim Witherspoon. Yeah. Witherspoon. He just had his number. He just was losing so much, but Frank just seemed to get tighter towards the back end of the fight because it's so muscle bound. And but now science has changed a little bit where you can see guys that are well muscled, but they can do the distance and do it a lot better. But Frank could knock a guy out with a jab, which I saw.
Yeah, no, he was. I mean, he's European champ, British champ. The first time I remember seeing him in person when he fought Joe Bugner, who had made a comeback.
Yeah,
Joe was rarely ever stopped. He went to the limit with Joe Frazier at his peak, and Frank blew him away. It was a one-sided fight, and he stayed on for many years after that and fought. He doesn't get the credit he does. Henry Cooper's another one, a great puncher. What he did with the alley fight, but there were other fights where he knocked the guys out. And he had terrific power. And guys were matched more evenly in those days as well.
Can I ask you, because you now and again you're dropping that you was ringside at some amazing fights. I think, oh my God, you were there. Can I ask you, in your experience in the years you've been in boxing, what fight was it? What was that fight? That fight where you thought that is the biggest puncher I've ever seen. That's the most sensational puncher I've ever seen.
Wow, I'd have to think really hard on that. Again, I saw Sonny Liston at the end. You couldn't tell by the fight I saw him. They were just judging by what I saw, not what, I saw him, but 30 years earlier when I didn't, he was a better fighter, 10 years, 15. Shave, as I said, that night he knocked out Norton in one round was pretty remarkable. And the night that Cooney knocked out Norton in one round, that was something you said. I mean, just talking about pure puncher, Ernie Shavers came to the guard and made a tremendous hit. He knocked out Jimmy Ellis in one round. And you could see that with an uppercut, if I recall. And that was the guy that, the minute you saw him, said, that guy can punch. And Pepino Cuevas, another one. I remember Jose Napoles knocking out Ernie Red Lopez, who was a terrific fight. They fought once before, 115. And the rematch, Napoles threw an uppercut. Boom, knocked this guy dead. And Bob Foster, of course, knocking out Dick Tiger.
Of course, Bob Foster, like heavyweight champion.
Brutal. Yeah, of course. Yeah, he said, oh my God, I didn't think Tiger was going to get up, frankly. That's how. But conversely, a few years later, Foster boxed Joe Frazier, and Frazier pretty much knocked him out in the same way that he had knocked out Tiger. So but Foster probably, as a pure puncher, was the greatest knockout puncher I've ever seen.
I'd actually, so obviously I'm a little bit younger than you, but only a little younger. And before
you'll catch up.
For me, I know. The one for me at first was Nigel Benn against General McLaren. And McLaren, up to that point, I saw him knock out Julian Jackson, and Julian Jackson had knocked out my friend Errol Graham.
That's another one that was memorable.
Yeah. And when I saw Julian Jackson take a man out, I'm like, oh my God, that is like scary. I don't know if I told the story when he broke Errol's teeth. He broke Errol's top teeth, but Julian Jackson. In the fight, broke his teeth through the gum shield. But then of late, I'd have to go towards Deontay Wilder. I'd look at Deontay Wilder and think, and he kind of blitzed a lot of this guy for what he lacked in technical ability. He made up tenfold in punch power, and I mean raw punch power. His legs were as skinny as that part of my arm. There's nothing about him. You think, how can such a big unit, sometimes you go in the ring on a 15 stone, but create so much power and knock people out. And that to me, mind blowing. I don't think I'll ever see anybody that had such fearsome power.
No, it's pound for pound, when you say compared to heavyweights with much greater bulk, same height. This is a guy sort of argued against when they're making the Bridgerweight division, saying, well, you've now got heavyweights 250, 245. And the people arguing against it were saying, well, look at Deontay Wilder. He's 6'5" tall. What is he, 6'9"? He's huge.
Yeah, he's huge.
Yeah, he weighs under 230 pounds. 225 he's coming. I think 219 in one fight. And he hits you and demolishes you. But guys can do it. No, Foster, again, he was a smaller man. It was obviously a light heavyweight, but very tall for his time. But Wilder is unique. I've never seen anything like that. And that power, it's incredible, unbelievable. Yeah, he's got to get his he won't get his just due, unfortunately, John, because what people, again, will remember, they seem to remember the spectacular win or the spectacular loss. And what resonates now is the losses, the way he was knocked out by Tyson Fury, who was not perceived as a great puncher, but that devastating loss in that last fight. But as a pure puncher, he's as good as anyone. Here's a question: who would you pick, Deontay Wilder or Tyson at their peaks?
Wow. For power, you know what? I can remember Tyson punching Frank Bruno and literally lifting him off the floor with the uppercuts. But then for that one, wow, that's a hard one. I'd have to, you see, Tyson, I would say, had more skill combined with the power, whereas Wilder had the power but less skill. So he'd be losing a fight, and he could remember when he knocked out Ortiz. You know, it was just it must have traveled about half a foot and took him out. So it might be a bit of a controversial one, but punch power, I'm not saying better fight, I'd say Wilder.
Yeah.
I'd say Wilder.
Well, when I think about it, you got a small man, basically, under 6 feet tall, has to come in. He's got to get within Wilder's range to hit him. And all he needs is one shot, and he can snap that right hand and knock you out with a 6-inch punch. Well, be a very provocative fight. I haven't noticed many people talking about that because, unfortunately for Wilder, well, Tyson at the very end was knocked out by McBride in ordinary guy.
Yeah.
Wilder, that loss is still so fresh in their minds that they have the fans are fickle, John. They dismiss you. You can do 30 knockouts in a row. Okay, but he got knocked out here. Let's go on to the next. And that's the flavor of the month. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm quite sure we've missed out quite a few concussive, amazing knockout artists. But you know what? Both series of this have been of heavy hitters has been intriguing, interesting, and enjoyable. Don, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.